Wooden drawer slides. My favorite. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're going to be working on these. Basically they are, well, an angle iron, if you would, only angle wood. And they have a tenon on either end that then slots into the front stretcher and into the back stretcher. And these together then become the slides that the drawers ride on. And this slide then stops the drawer from moving side to side and then gives it a nice surface to smoothly ride along. So we're going to be basically making these today and then fitting them into the stretchers, making everything work the way it should. So a fairly simple process, but I want to show a couple different ways of making it happen for different people with different tools. Let's dive in. Okay, so now it's time to start working on the drawer slides. And these are basically just like brackets that hold the bottom corner of the drawer. They're going to stop the drawer from moving side to side, and they're also going to hold up the drawer. So they are basically an L bracket that runs along the side. So what they need to do is on the front there will be a tenon that connects onto that bottom front stretcher, and then in the back there'll be another tenon that goes into the back stretcher, and between those two stretchers they will hold up this bracket. So it's a fairly straightforward little build. It's going to be, well, basically just a big rabbet running down this board and then cut off either piece so you're left with a tenon. Now, before I make these stretchers, I actually want to cut in this long rabbet into this board, and I want to cut it into either side here. And the reason I want to do that is because it's easier to cut that rabbet into this board before I cut it off. Just like when I made the bead on the bottom stretcher, it would have been much easier to do it as a board. That way I can put it on the side of the bench here, clamp it in my end, and run along it. So I'm going to make a rabbet in here. This rabbet will be in 3/4 of an inch and will be down 3/8 of an inch. So this is a fairly straightforward little build. I'm going to show you two different ways of doing it, one on one side and the other on the other side. So let's dive in. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark out this rabbet, and it needs to be 3/4 of an inch deep. So I'm going to set my marking gauge at 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to run down the top here, 3/4 of an inch on this side. And then this particular board is slightly thicker than 3/4 inch, and that's perfectly fine. The thickness here doesn't matter. In the plans here it actually calls for 5/8 inch thick, but you can make it however tall you want. The height of the board, the thickness of the board will just determine how high the sidewalls are that capture it, and those can be whatever height you want. And so in this case I just want to show you this isn't the 5/8 requested on the sheet, nor is it the 3/4 that I would like it to be. It really doesn't matter what it is. The only thing that matters is the bottom thickness of this rabbet is 3/8 of an inch. So then I can set this to 3/8 of an inch and mark out the bottom rabbet. So then, as I have the 3/4 inch in from this side, I'm going to put the 3/8 on here, and this then shows me what I need to remove. I need to cut down to this 3/8 inch line and along the 3/4 inch line. And to give myself a cutting stop on one side, I'm just going to do this across the end, and then this here. Now first off, I'm going to show you my preferred method of cutting in the rabbet, and that's going to be simply cutting a groove here and then cutting a groove here. And the reason I like doing that is with a plane So my first method, and the one I'm generally going to use, is using a moving philistor plane. Now, method number one is a moving philistor plane. This is basically a shoulder plane with a fence and a depth stop and sometimes a nicker. I got this one at a Midwest tool collectors meet a while ago, and they're a lot of fun because they're fairly easy to set up and they move fairly quickly. So you can actually cut along it. The one thing you want to be careful about is you want to be going with the grain. And so on this side, I should be going with the grain. Did I read it correctly? Yeah, I'm going against the grain down there too. So this might actually be a little more difficult, so I might use the other method on this one. And this kind of runs into that problem because you can only go one way. And so if you're going against the grain, you end up with a lot of tear out and it's less fun. So let me show you option number two. Option number 2 is to set up a Stanley 55 or 45 with a plow iron in there. So I have this little, I think this one's an 1/8 inch wide cutter, and what I can do is I can cut down to depth on one side, then rotate it 90 degrees, cut down to depth on the other, and hopefully these two will meet up in the middle. This is a rather enjoyable one, especially when you have it set up to cut a fairly heavy cut like this. I'm almost taking off a 1/16 inch because it's such a small head on there. And I can march down to depth really quick like. Even going against the grain, which is making it very tough right now. And then we can grab the board, rotate it 190 degrees, and reset the fence to be this new 3/8 of an inch depth as opposed to this 3/4 inch depth. I decided to move it over here into the leg vise. That's kind of where this shines a little bit more. I just need to be careful in this particular one that I'm going straight down. I don't want it to be skewing off one way or the other. I'm just going to keep going until I cut through into that previous groove I just made. Ooh, there we just broke through there. There, we broke that off. Just want to keep going down to get rid of all that little fluff. Then to clean it all up, I might come in with a chisel and just run down that. There's always a little bit in the corner when you do it this way. I know, I can hear the outcries right now, but what if I don't have a filister plane, a shouldering plane, a grooving plane? Well, you could also use a curving plane, and I made this one a while ago. And basically this is a saw with a fence, and it allows you to cut down to a specific depth at a specific amount in. Then you move this fence in and out to then set the exact same thing. It's basically a very, very thin plow plane. So you could use that to then cut down your shoulder and your cheek of the rabbit. But let's just say you don't have any of these things, and the only thing you have is a saw. How can you do it with just a saw? Let me show you. So the next option is you can line up a fence board on top, line that up, put in your hold fast, tap that down, and then you can just run a fence along that line and cut down to depth. But wait a second, you're telling me you don't have hold fasts or even a fence board, and you don't have all those other things. All you have is a saw, but you still want to do the work. Well, there's still another way. Let me show you. There's this fantastic tool called the human hand. And the human hand can grip the human saw. And the human hand can grip the hand saw. And because you have a line now, all you have to do is cut along the line, just like it were any other line. It just happens to be a slightly longer one. In this case, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to work it back. And I'm going to be eyeballing that line. I'm just going to slowly bring my heel down as I come back farther and farther, cutting along that line. And if you have a little bit of a problem following that line, then all you need to do is come in with a chisel and make a knife wall for your saw to fit into. It's a little bit more difficult to make a knife wall with the grain cut, but it's not that difficult to maintain. So now we can just let it sit into that knife wall and come all the way back along this, keeping it in place. Slowly create a kerf that the saw then fits in and follows. Once you have that kerf, then you can keep running. Now because I'm doing a board that's almost the length, actually it's almost exactly the length of my saw, I want to go all the way through the board so that all the dirt, all of the chips will then fall out the saw. And then I'll come back here and I'll go all the way through the saw, trying to keep the saw vertical. And I'll just keep going down like this until I get down to depth. Exactly like a plow plane, just without a fence. Occasionally checking, making sure I'm getting close to my line. Got about 1/8 inch or more to go. Getting close. Then to cut down the other side, we're going to flip it over. And check it out, we're going to do precisely the exact same thing on the top here, just clamping it into the vise and cutting down from there. And we're getting close to the end and this piece is getting weak. Oops, cut through there, there we go. There we go, nice shoulder all the way across using just a saw and a chisel to make a knife wall. Or you really don't even need that. Don't even need a fence, just a nice, simple cut. So now I have two matching rabbets on either side of this, and I need to cut off the piece that I don't need. And that needs to be 1 inch and 1/8 in here. So this wall will then be a 3/8 inch piece. So I can set my marking gauge into 1 inch and 1/8. I can put it on here, and I can track down this side. So I can mark in 1 inch and 1/8 here, and then cut it off. So after I mark this off, I'll show you how I cut it. So now I've set those lines on there, I can grab a saw, and I can start cutting down. Then after cutting all the way down, I can pull them out, and I can put them in the vise and plane off the saw marks. And then we're ready to start working on the ends. This really won't take that much more to finish these up. So grab a plane, smooth off saw marks. So now, before going any further, I need to choose which one of these goes where. Which one will be on the left side of the drawer, which one will be on the right side, and which direction is forward. So I can take a piece of this, I'm going to put it on here. I'm going to take a piece, I'm going to put it on here, and I want them to then be, let's say this one is right, and I'm going to push an arrow aiming forward. Any notification is talking about the front on mine. So right, forward, left, forward. So the arrow points front, and that way I know which of these then can get fit into the front stretcher and the back stretcher. So now let us figure out how to cut the end. So now I've attached the bottom front stretcher into the two legs, and this will then slot down into there. So we need to remove some of this riser so that this will then become the tenon that rests in this front stretcher. And we'll do the exact same thing on this side. So we need to figure out how far back to cut this tenon so that it fits down in there. To do that, I'm going to grab my marking gauge, and I'm going to set the wheel flat down on the bottom of that mortise, slide this down, make sure I'm good in contact there, and then I'm going to mark it. And so on this one, I'm going to cut this one back to this distance here. That should be a really nice tight fit into there. I'm going to then mark off the other one, and I'm going to then check first, is this the same? And in this case, yes, that is the same. So then on this one, I can do the exact same thing on here and mark off this distance. And now we know how much we can cut off of this end so that will then fit in there. So let me finish marking these up, and then I'll show you how to cut them off. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set it over here on the bench hook, and I'm going to cut down along that line I drew. And I'm just going to cut this tongue off so that it'll fit back in there. Just going to cut until I nick through. Like that. Now I can put it in here and then cut down and remove that chunk. And I actually want to stay a little ways away from my line so that I still have this tenon. I want this tenon to be a little bit fat, and I want to clean it up a little bit, make sure I get a really nice tight fit in that mortise over there. There, that little split off is actually kind of nice because then it pushes it over just a hair. Just clean this up. And let's test it in the joint. So this is the bottom stretcher, and there's the leg we're looking at from the back, so the bead is on the other side. And I'm going to fit this in here. And it should slide all the way down, and then this should rest flush up against the leg. And in this case, it's just a hair tight. So I'm going to go over and clean it up, and then see what it does when it fits in there now. So I can come in here with the chisel. I'm just going to take a hair off of this. Just down to there. Let's take that back and test it. So now it should fit down in there. All the way down in flush. I like it. Fairly nice fit, but still enough so I can pull it out. And then that will rest in there. So now we need to cut the other end and how that fits onto the other stretcher. I'll show you how to do that. So far, one of the things that I have not done is I have not cut these to length. And in the drawings, it should be, I think it is 2 foot 2 1/4, something like that. I don't care what that length is. The only thing that's important is it matches the stretcher. This piece here will actually rest in between the legs. So it needs to be precisely the same length as the stretcher that it will be laying against. In this case, I'm actually going to make it slightly smaller. So to mark that, I'm going to set it up against the stretcher, use my finger as a stop, and then mark off just a hair smaller that line. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Theoretically, I should do this with the other stretcher from the other side, but oh well, they're close enough because I used one to measure the other. And I want that to be the length. Now this is the inside length. This is the length of this piece. This piece down here needs to be a 1/2 inch longer because it needs to mortise into this 1/2 inch. So now that I have this mark on here, what I want to do is come in with a knife and transfer these lines all the way around this particular piece and cut it off just like I did at the other end where I cut this little piece off over here. So transfer this line around, and then just as before, we can come in and cut off this little scrap piece, which should only take a moment here. So on the other side, I cut down with the saw here, but I want to show you another way. If your grain is really nice and straight and you want to trust it, what you can do is set the chisel in here and go tap. And it ran a little bit, but not too bad. Actually ended up with a fairly clean surface. Just do a little bit of edging. And we should be. There we go. So now that I've cut this piece out of here, I need to cut this down to length. And really all it needs to be is 3/8 of an inch plus something else. It just has to stick in for the amount that it sticks past the leg and then a little bit into the back stretcher, something like about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. So if it's like 3/4 of an inch total in length, then that would be perfectly fine. Actually, I think that's what the drawings call for, is 3/4 of an inch long. So with a line on there at 3/4 of an inch, we can set that in the bench hook, slice it down, and we've got ourselves a tenon ready to be going into a mortise. Now we don't have the mortise yet for this to slide into. Next thing we're going to do is get the stretcher and figure out where to put that hole for this to slide down into. So we have the drawer slides now with one end ready to go into the front, and I need to put together the back of this so that we can attach these into the back. And it's going to be a fairly simple thing of just cutting a small mortise here to make them fit. So what we need to do is make sure that these stretchers are the same distance up from the bottom of this stretcher on this stretcher. So whatever the distance is from the bottom of this stretcher to the bottom of the slide needs to be the exact same distance on here from the bottom of the stretcher to the bottom of the slide. So I'm going to grab my marking gauge and I'm going to set it on here and grab that measurement. Lock it down. Test it, make sure it's still there. Cool. And so that's my mark of how far up it needs to go. The other thing is how far out does it need to go, and that's determined by this ledge needs to match up with this side of the stretcher so that it goes in like that. And then the top will just be marked on that. So let's take these legs off here and then mark it up. So now I need to make sure that I have the right stretcher on the right side and the left stretcher on the left side and figure out where they need to go. Because I have a mark of how far up from the bottom, I'm going to put in a small mark here. And then do the exact same thing on this side. Then I'll grab my marking knife and I'll put it on that mark, and I'll put a mark flush on that side. I'll put a mark here, and then I'll put a mark here. I'll come to the square and carry all these marks around, making sure that they are big enough for what I need. Do the same thing on this side, and then we're ready to cut out this mortise to the depth of that tenon. So to do that, I'm going to grab out the holdfast, tap this down, and just like you've seen me do in previous, I'm just going to come in here with a chisel, stay away from the lines, and chop down. And just make it slowly down to what I need it to be. I'm not going to rush this, because rushing is the enemy of woodworking. It's one of the great things about hand tools. They teach you to slow down and enjoy the process, not just the end result. So before I get it trimmed down too far, I'm going to check the fit. And yeah, that was pretty good. It's a little on the loose side, but it'll work. So I'm just going to keep going down until I am down to this depth. And there we go. That's the fit that I'm looking for. little bit of a tap, take some pull to get out of there. That's what we need. Just clean it up a little bit, and we'll do the other side, and the mortise is done. Now, the depth of these really does not matter that much, because we're going to adjust the tenon to be the proper length. What I do want to make sure is that the depth of them does not interfere with this bead. So I'm only going to go about halfway into this, so somewhere around 3/8 or so. I don't want this to come all the way through and weaken this end. So the next thing we need to do is trim off this tenon so that it is not too long. And what I want to do is slide it in here and then find out how far away this shoulder is from the leg. And I can do it a couple different ways. Number one, I can put my knife in here and mark on the shoulder, and the distance from the shoulder to my mark is how much I want to cut off here. So I'm going to put a mark right here. I'm just going to eyeball it because that's close enough for what we need right there. And then I can cut this off at that length, and it should fit in there. So after cutting it off with the bench hook, we can fit it in there, and it goes down and rests nicely, just like that. So there is that. This then becomes the slide that the drawer will run on, mortised into here, and then mortised into the front on the other end. So our drawer slides are done and ready to go. This one I like the fit on. Just a nice, tight, personal fit. This one's a little bit sloppy. Not too bad, though. So there you have it. Drawer slides, so the drawer can now fit into the slot, move back and forth, and be a functioning drawer. Next time we will be talking about starting to work on the drawer, doing the dovetail work, and I'm looking forward to that video, as I know quite a few of you are as well. This has been a blast of a build. If you'd like to follow along with it, I am going into full detail on every step of this build. I'll have an entire build series in the videos so you can follow along, and I also will be having plans available. If they are available right now, you'll see a link down in the description below. So yes, if you'd like to follow along, feel free to do so. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, let me know in the comments below. I do answer as many of those as I can possibly get to. Also, I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are the reason why I can do these longer format videos and try to get more information and detail out there. I like doing this, and I'd like to do it more, so if it's something you like, please let me know. If you'd like to find out more about Patreon or help out with that, you can do so right down there. Also, if you'd like to subscribe and see some behind-the-scenes footage, you can do that as well. That's about it for today, and until next time, have a wonderful day.